Hi there. In this video we'll be covering, is ghostwriting ethical? Understanding the ethics of ghostwriting can help you bring out your strongest message possible without misrepresenting yourself or your expertise. By the end of this video, you will learn the 2 tracks of ghostwriting, the problems that can arise from non-collaborative projects, and why it can be smart to be transparent and open about getting ghostwriting help. And stay tuned until the end of the video for a free gift. Let's dive in. People use ghostwriting help all the time, which is why it really makes me shake my head a little bit whenever there's an issue involving a ghostwriter and a client. I go back to the issue involving Millie Bobby Brown. She's the Stranger Things actress. She wrote a book with a ghostwriter. It was a fictionalized account of some relatives of hers, and she utilized a ghostwriter to help bring this book forward. Writing a book is difficult for anybody, and I would think especially so for somebody with the schedule like Millie Bobby Brown's, and yet there were so many people critical when she was open and thankful of her ghostwriter, which I thought was really frustrating. It was really frustrating to see that backlash. I mean, she ended up being a New York Times best-selling author, so be it. But I think it's important for people to understand that ghostwriting is everywhere, that the books that you don't even think were ghostwritten were probably ghostwritten. John F. Kennedy used a ghostwriter for his memoir. Barack Obama is suspected to have used a ghostwriter. That's an interesting one. So many people dating back to biblical times have used ghostwriters, and they're everywhere. They're a great way to bring out your message. They're a great way to tell your strongest story. For me, personally, obviously I'm biased on this as a book ghostwriter, but I would much rather work with somebody to help bring out the best story rather than doing it all myself and writing a book that isn't quite what it could be. There are really 2 tracks of ghostwriting. There's a collaborative process and there's a non-collaborative process. I've dealt with both. The collaborative process is much better. I remember one project I worked on with a business leader. I took all these course recordings and uploaded them and transcribed them into text. I never even met with him. I don't even know if I actually talked to him at any point in the entire book writing process. It was non-collaborative, and because of that, I felt like the book suffered. It wasn't as good as it could have been. I didn't get to ask questions and follow up and bounce off ideas. I basically took his course and just rewrote it. And the book sold okay, it was fine, but it was kind of disappointing and disengaging for me as a book ghostwriter. I take that and compare that to most of my projects where I'm meeting weekly with clients. I'm talking through different parts of the book with them. They're offering immediate feedback. They're getting feedback from the writing I'm sending them. This bounce back and forth, and we're in constant contact. I love that process, and I think it makes for a better book. One thing to keep in mind when working with a ghostwriter is that you as the expert should be supplying the expertise. I can go online and find all kinds of sources to back up your material. I can find supporting evidence and facts and information, but the author is the person who's supplying the expertise. The author is the person in the arena. It's the person who's dealing with these issues on a daily basis. The author's words and messages are going to be that much stronger than anything a ghostwriter is going to find online or through books or sources. I think it can be beneficial when a ghostwriter can provide supporting evidence and background details and round out research. At times I do those things, but I think it's a lot more powerful when the author, the client, the person I'm working with, the person whose name is on the cover of the book, is supplying a lot of that material themselves and supplying the expertise. That way they're the expert on the topic and I'm the expert on the storytelling. That collaboration really takes everything to a new level. When I've seen a book misaligned, it's typically because the author isn't as engaged during the writing process and they're leaning on the ghostwriter for more of that research and more of that support. And the more and more that the ghostwriter writes, now the author's recognizing this doesn't sound like me, this isn't quite right, I feel like this could be stronger. Or they just don't feel themselves in the story because they're not part of the story. They basically gave away their storytelling power to just have somebody write a book for them. When it's not somebody who's writing a book based on their expertise or not somebody in their own company, it's some outside person who knows little or nothing potentially about the topic at hand. And when you work with a book ghostwriter, you really should be right in step with them, providing everything they need to help them tell the best story possible. And when those books are misaligned, it's not always the first chapter or the second chapter that these issues bubble up. It's the 8th or 9th or 10th chapter, or it's when it's in draft phase. When it's in editing phase, you think of spending 6 to 12 months of time and untold amount of money writing a book that you don't feel connected to, and then finally decide, this isn't what I want. That's a really bad thing. And being more collaborative from the beginning is going to make that process easier and also make it more recognizable to you if things don't feel quite right, that you can actually flag it and pick it up earlier and have a conversation and sort it out instead of getting too far down the line. Now you have to really kind of uproot and rewrite what has already been done. Ethical issues come through in book writing in so many different ways, whether that's plagiarism, whether that's copyright, whether that's using ChatGPT to write the book. There's so many things people do to try to cut corners or try to build credibility when they don't need to. All those things can be a problem, and especially when it's a non-collaborative process. You're really opening up the door for more of those things to happen. If you and your ghostwriter aren't in touch, where's the ghostwriter getting the information from? How do you know it's legitimate? How do you know it's credible? Are they doing things that are counter to your understanding? Are they writing elements of the story that contradict your beliefs? It's really tough to know what your ghostwriter is doing and staying on track with the book if you as the author are basically giving up that seed and allowing for those other opportunities, those other issues to pop up and emerge. The way that your ghostwriter is credited is something important to think about, and it's something that comes up in the contract phase. It should be outlined in the contract that you sign with your ghostwriter. And it outlines if they're going to be credited on the cover, if they're credited inside the book, if they're not credited at all. It's good to know those things. It's good to approach those things with clarity and understanding, and just to be crystal clear, because you don't want any misunderstandings later. You don't want any issues to pop up down the road of, oh, you promised this and this didn't end up happening. I've dealt with this myself on a number of occasions. One of my first ghostwriting projects I was really proud of, and I finished the draft, and I was supposed to be credited in the acknowledgments based on the contract I signed. So I was very surprised when I received the draft of the acknowledgments, and I read it through and read it through. The author had credited their dogs, but they didn't credit me as the ghostwriter, or credit me as the book editor or anything else. My name wasn't in there. I actually had to raise my hand and complain and say, hey, it's based on my contract. I'm supposed to be credited in the book. The name was eventually added. It wasn't fun to deal with that, but luckily there was a contract that we had signed that clarified all those issues. So when those issues emerged later, I could point back to it and say, hey, I'm supposed to be credited. But that goes both ways. It's important to have a clear understanding of the parameters and the scope and the type of credit that you'll have as you begin engaging with a ghostwriter. When in doubt, I find that it's good to be transparent about people who work on your book. I don't see it as a detriment to know that you worked with a ghostwriter. I think it's a powerful thing to know that you trusted your story and you trusted working with some of the best people to help bring it forward. Some of my most powerful ghostwriting projects have involved people who've written books on their own, but they needed help getting across the finish line with this specific project. It just takes it to a new level. Here's somebody who's written books, and they even know this is outside of their scope. I think there's this struggle and challenge and heavy lift involved with book writing. It can make the lift and the load that much easier when you're working with other people. I don't see an issue with crediting or not crediting. Obviously, that's outlined in the contract. If you credit somebody for working with you, great. Again, I go back to movie credits, and you think of the hundreds of people that worked on a movie. Is the director any less powerful, or the main star any less powerful because other people worked on it? I don't think so. Every book project that you'll see has had numerous ideations, numerous changes, numerous steps in the process, numerous rounds of editing. There's a lot of touch points in that book, and the book ghostwriter is somebody who is front and center to a lot of them. Is front and center to the germination of the book. And I think it's great when an author can credit a book ghostwriter. I don't think there needs to be a stigma around if you can do it all by yourself or not. As somebody who's taken 8 years to write a book and 6 weeks to write a book, I know what it feels like on both sides of the equation. And it's great to be able to do it yourself, but if you can't or don't have the time, find somebody else who can do it really well and help you tell your message in the best way. All right, now that you learned about ghostwriting and ethics, I wanted to invite you to a free opportunity. There's so many aspects to writing and publishing a book, from the author side and from the ghostwriter side, and in order to be able to properly capture that, I recorded a course called Good Book Blueprint with a dear book collaborator of mine, Nate Woodbury. Just go to goodbookblueprint.com. You can click the link below and watch this course that we recorded and talk all about the challenges, the pain points, the opportunities, and the power that comes with book ghostwriting. Remember, good ghostwriting makes great books. I'm Dan Good. Thanks for watching.